The July 2024 NMRA Division 7 monthly members meeting featured a presentation honoring and remembering Bob Fink and his Dayton Union Railroad. Bob was a prominent member of the NMRA Division 3 in Dayton. John Burchnall and Rick Lach wrote an article about Bob's layout for the NMRA Magazine. From the work done to create the magazine article, John and Rick created this presentation. The article was in the February 2023 issue of NMRA Magazine.
All right. So we announced that. All right. So everybody, I think, or except for maybe a few people, know John, who's been in our division forever. Put it in simplest terms, in 77. Okay, and former superintendent, and etc. So, man, jack of many trades with what he does for us. And then Bob is with Division 3.
Rick.
You told me,
Rick.
Sorry, Rick. You told me you wore multiple hats in the past, also with them.
Had all the elected positions: chief clerk, superintendent, assistant. I'm now just on the board of governors, so we can give room for bringing on new leadership. So.
And if you missed the clinic in May, it was fantastic. I had not heard about him. I forgot the name.
The Warther Museum.
The Warther Museum. So again, wealth of information, experiences, and knowledge. So the two of them are going to put on a wonderful clinic today about the Bob Fink layout that has been dismantled correctly, if I remember right. And it was put in, published in the NMRA Magazine when?
February last year.
Last February, okay. So I knew it was fairly recent. If you haven't read that article, go back and look it up, and you can get more details and more images maybe for you to hold on to. Who wants to start?
I'm starting.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be back here. This is a bigger pleasure for me because, as you see the title, this is a tribute article. Bob Fink was a good friend of mine, a mentor, a fellow Board of Governors member for our division, and I just learned a lot from him. When he passed in May of 21, I really felt a huge sense of loss, losing a good friend, but somebody that I also admired as a modeler. So when it came time to dismantle his layout, sell the house and everything, we made sure that we treated his railroad estate with a lot of respect, and we made sure it didn't end up in a pile of plaster someplace. So we're going to look at Bob and his development as a modeler. We're going to look at the layout, and we're going to talk about the article that John and I co-authored and eventually got it published in the NMRA Magazine as a lasting tribute to our friend. Okay. He is an MMR. He was MMR number 161. And I thought that was kind of cool. That's a picture of him with his only child, Cindy, and she's the one who was the executor of the estate and the one that we worked with quite a bit in the disposal of his layout and in publishing the article. Bob was born in 1935. What else happened in 35? NMRA started somewhere right around there. Model Railroader Magazine and Bob Fink. So in my mind, I just kind of associate my friend with the establishment of the NMRA and the Model Railroader Magazine. Cindy really tells an interesting story, how she, as a 9-year-old little girl, learned to have to tolerate and then kind of be grumpy about doing things model railroading with with all the men that came down and operated and built trains in the basement. She went on field trips with Bob. They sat at intersections and actually waited for trains to come by so he could photograph them and later build them, scratch build them as models. He's obviously an NMRA member. He joined the NMRA in '56. Division 3 was established by Lone Eagle Payne in May of 1959. By the way, Al McClellan joined the division in January of 1960. So Bob was a member of the NMRA for 62 years. And I think that's a real tribute to a great hobby. If you look at the list of his accomplishments and his expertise, just about everything we do in model railroading, he had a hand in. I know that he spoke not only to our division, but other divisions. He spoke at regional conventions and national conventions. If you have the Model Railroader magazine on DVD, you punch in the index and put in Robert Fink, it'll come up with 43 articles that he wrote just for Model Railroader magazine. So prolific author, prolific speaker, tremendous advocate, speaking advocate for the hobby. I know I've mentioned this to Frank a number of times. Bob probably is one of very few of the MMRs who have all 11 achievements. Even though 7 is the magic number, that was a challenge that I think he enjoyed, and he ended up getting all 11 of them. So he died at the end of May 2021. He's been dead now a little over 3 years, and at the age of 86, so a full lifetime, but just a tremendous, tremendous personality. This is what it looks like. And to me, this slide says kind of everything. Most of his certificates he earned in the 1990s, and I think motive power was his last one. In my mind, that's the hardest one to get, and that was a good challenge. So in his train room, he had frames with all 11 of the certificates and his plaque up in there and proudly displayed those. Okay, we can see that he published a lot in Railroad Model Craftsman, in other train magazines, but primarily for Model Railroader. The ones that he actually published articles on structures, I went out on eBay and purchased them. And these, he would build a structure, then he'd write about it, he'd photograph it, and then he'd write about it. So these all came out in the 70s, which I thought was kind of interesting. Here are some coaling towers, and the one that I enjoy the most, this is his daughter Cindy at the age of 9, pretending like she's running a train and she knows what's going on. She was the grumpy kid that thought that she should have a pool table in the basement rather than a railroad. Wouldn't you know, I looked for those magazines. I knew I was coming here today. I put them in a spot that I knew I wouldn't forget where I put them, and I couldn't find them. So I'm glad that John and I took pictures of those and we've included them in this presentation. So here's an example of some of his work. These are all scratch built on the layout and written about. Okay, it took a number of layouts and a number of times to practice to hone his skills. He had apartment size layouts early on in his and Marcy's marriage because they just had apartments. Later, when he moved into a house, he had 3 full basement layouts in each of his last 3 houses. The middle one was the Dayton, Duluth, and Western, and he used some parts of that, some modules, on the one that we wrote about, the Dayton Union Railway. That's him younger, yeah.
That's on the middle layout.
Yeah. So we're sharing with you tonight, or this afternoon, the last layout, the culmination of what I think is all of his modeling skills. This layout was available for the National Convention here in Cincinnati in 2005. And as John and I were driving over, we wanted to find out how many of you actually knew Bob Fink? Quite a bit. How many of you saw his layout? Again, quite a bit. You operate on it? Okay, well, it's a higher percentage than I thought so. How many of you have seen our article? That was a frustration for me too. Our division, I thought that we would at least get a lot of acknowledgments, but I've only got about 4 or 5 from our division. Turns out that our people don't get the printed copy of the magazine, and maybe when it comes to you in the online, they just don't read it.
How many people get the printed magazine here? And you didn't see the article? No.
Yeah, it was the February 2023 issue.
You can't remember that.
You can't remember back that far, yeah. Well, time does go by fast, okay.
2023, last February.
Everybody has access to it.
Yeah, of course you
Yeah.
go online.
That's a big one.
How many people regularly go online and look at the NMRA magazine? 2 people. 2 people. Well, that explains that.
Okay,
Everybody's paying for it, but not looking at it.
so we knew that Bob was sick. He went up to live with Cindy in Cleveland. He had been treated at the Cleveland Clinic. We thought maybe the treatment that they were giving him was going to work. He made a turn for the worse, and we found out that he had passed away at the end of May. Really a shock to our division, and really, in my mind, I can still remember my heart sinking when I found out about it. Right away, I thought, well, we got to do something as a tribute and maybe memorialize Bob. So what you're hearing today and what you looked at in print is the continuation to memorialize and tell the Bob Fink story. We're going to talk about the layout here. I'm going to say a few more things about his biography. Then I'm going to take you around the layout and photos that we took. And then John is going to give us some of the detective work that he had to do because we couldn't find a layout track plan. And then we'll conclude with some nice comments from Cindy and a couple other things. You take a look and see, as I said, once he was deceased and we were down there trying to figure out what we're going to do, we looked in all his files, couldn't get into the computer right away, but we could not find a track plan. And that was solving a big mystery, and John will tell you about that.
Yeah, you get it.
I think the NMRA must have back issues in the warehouse somewhere too.
They don't
They
have,
don't anymore? Okay.
you normally don't have back issues, but if you get it right away, you sometimes don't have extra.
You can download it from the website.
Well, yeah, you can download it as a PDF.
It's an 8-page article with about 16, 18 photos in it. And I think it's well worth taking
It's
a
actually
look at.
9 pages counting Sydney's article, which will show you.
Yeah. Okay. And John will tell you how we ended up with NMRA Magazine as opposed to Model Railroader, Craftsman, or any of the other hobbies. And for the first time, I don't ever remember an offspring of a model railroader or a modeler writing a companion article on what the disposition of his railroad empire was like for her to experience. So there's an article by his daughter, and I'm going to read you the last paragraph of that. Here's the article, and they set it out very nicely. It was very interesting. I may steal some of John's thunder, but we worked really hard on this. As a matter of fact, I think we touched every word in our draft, moved them around, moved paragraphs around, moved pictures around, did sidebars and that type of thing, to the point where when we actually sent the draft in, there were no changes to be made. No changes. Full basement layout, nothing, to the best of my knowledge, nothing bought ready-made. All of his structures, bridges, and even rolling stock were either tinkered or scratch-built. And I really like the way they kept our header up there, the tribute article. And that's his granddaughter as well, with Cindy on a trip that they took. Okay, this is called the Dayton Union Railroad. Bob appreciated history, and he really liked the history of the 4 major railroads that came through Dayton. So he decided to build his railroad going back to the year 1939 in a non-winter setting, okay? He researched all structures, or all businesses that would have been in Dayton at that time, including a very thriving Dayton Union Station. So 12 feet of his module, part of it, is Dayton Union Station, with 3 platforms, 8 through tracks, and a dual level station with an operating clock in it. Other things are landmarks from Dayton at that time. There's, as you approach Dayton from the south, there's a 3-span truss bridge. He photographed that from several different angles, and through the selective compression was able to take the characteristics of that particular bridge and worked it down to 1 span, which I thought was kind of interesting. When we tried to see what we could do with the layout, we invited the display caretaker of Carillon Park over. We were hoping to be able to get this into Carillon Park. But because of the way that you do the selective constriction and that type of thing, they decided not to take the layout because it was not historically accurate in terms of exactly where the roads are, where the tracks are and everything. And we ended up, it ended up getting purchased by somebody rather than, and incorporated into another layout in a separate building on his property. He started this in 2003, finished it in 2005, just in time for the Cincinnati Convention. Track plan is a 2-track folded dog bone with lots of yards, lots of switches, lots of buildings, lots of bridges, lots of structures, and as John will tell you, I would get a phone call from John all excited. I just found another switch with another spur or another place here from the photos that we took.
Okay, we'll talk about that track plan later, but that was a major ordeal in all this. I think I went off the screen, so there you go. So one of the things we found out, this whole thing Rick didn't mention exactly, but he alluded to it. This whole thing was a detective mission by him and I, because I had hardly ever seen the layout before, and I had 2 days to photograph it before it was being torn down. And so we didn't have much time to do anything. We looked for a track plan, couldn't find it. You'll see a photo of Rick actually looking for the track plan here later in one of the wide-angle shots. But what we also discovered, and this is important for all of you in the room and all future model railroaders, is he was pretty frugal modeler. He did not spend a lot of money. He didn't buy Broadway limited engines. He had a lot of nice running engines that he kit bashed into something else. He'd take brass, he'd take metal, and he'd redo everything. So he was a master tinkerer and integrator of all his equipment. He would get used cars, used locomotives, and he'd redo them totally. And so he did not spend a lot of money. In fact, his control system, you see little pictures here of the control system, that was actually borrowed from a club. He bought it used from a club in California. They sold it to him. It was just a push-button cab control system. But this is his modeling philosophy. He didn't spend a fortune, and he had a beautiful layout. So there's a lot to learn here from some of us. So we call it frugal, creatively classic methods. And you go in because not cheap, just frugal. And so he did a lot of things that were ahead of his time. He had really wide aisles, except in a couple of pinch points. He had this exposed open staging yard in the back that was partially viewable from the layout. No duck unders, no gates, all this stuff. He had only one section of hidden track, and I thought that was amazing because a lot of people in this era would build a lot of hidden trackage. He did not. He understood that that was bad. So a lot of hand-laid track, again, that's more inexpensive than anything to do that, plus it's very high quality usually. He had polystyrene backdrops. I've never seen this done before, but polystyrene, I'm sorry, let's switch the other mic. Polystyrene, hello, test. Test. Whoa, okay, very testy. Okay, he had, turn this one off. I don't know why that's doing that. The speakers are way out there. All right, polystyrene, a little higher maybe. Polystyrene backdrops. So he used 3/4 inch foam board, blue foam board, and painted it with more blue for sky and some clouds. And he very inexpensive, very lightweight, very easy to mount in this layout. I mean, that was interesting. I've not seen that done before. I think I might want to switch the other mic. Is this really coming through?
It's fine, John.
All right.
Don't worry about
Okay, I told you about the block control system. We'll get to that a little bit later. A lot of surplus electrical components. You remember the store Mendelssohn's up in Dayton? Those of you that remember have been here long enough. They used to have a surplus electronics store that was a gold mine of cheap stuff from World War II, basically. Really cool. He had some crossing flashers with sensors, optical sensors. He had all sorts of cool stuff. And these rebuilt vintage locomotives were amazing on this layout. A lot of steam. Had a whole bunch of steam. And not a Broadway limited a moment, I don't believe. So here we go. Here's a view from the dispatcher's room, which is in this back corner right here. And we'll get to that later. But you can see the styrene backdrop, this polystyrene foam board. And that's all he did for backdrops. It was a little bit of a pain taking photos because he tapered the edges and you lose the backdrop on the taper. This peninsula and this peninsula, you can see, are basically the only two blobs on the railroad, if you will, in track plane parlance. This is that trestle you saw in that other picture of him in the old layout, and there's another trestle there. Actually, no, the trestle in the other layout was over there. So there's 3 old trestles from his prior layout. That's why he could build this so fast in 2 years. He reused his structures and his bridges from the prior layout. So they have more of a Western theme, but really this is Dayton, and Dayton didn't have trestles like that, but who cares? Artistic license. Here's the view when you walk in the train room. Right away, Rick always likes this view, but this is the way he remembered coming in. Look how clean the floor is here, too. Really nice. Along this side is that Dayton Union Station complex that Rick was talking about. We'll get another picture, the next picture on that one. Here's a picture of that, part of it. You can see the 3 platforms and the station itself. And then down the bottom, we got a trolley line going by, and then you notice the street roads are one level below. Everything was elevated. This is the way it really was in Dayton. And you can get a closer look at that. You can see here the trolley line goes really along this narrow ledge. He just barely fit that in. And then he has lights inside the street in here to see back in the street and imply it goes all the way through. Really interesting how he did that. Here's another view from the other end, from the station end, looking towards all the tracks. And every train in his operating scheme, we get to that in a few more slides, you'll see every train in his operating scheme went through the Union Terminal, even the freight trains. So it's kind of interesting the way he designed this. We'll talk about track plan later. I had to figure out this whole track plan from the photos. Rick took just some snapshots, photos for documentation of every square inch, more or less, and I took the more publication quality photos with my light setups and camera. But then we had to use them, I did, to draw the track plan because we had no source. We thought we could find one on his computer or something, but we didn't have a password for his computer. And so we couldn't get in. So that's a little watch out to all of you. Make sure you give somebody your password to your computer. That'd be helpful. I don't know if it was there or not, but it would have helped probably. So here's a close-up view. Now at the end of the terminal, he had it split. And then those two tracks came together later. It's basically a dual track around layout, but they're split through a couple of yards and an engine facility seen here in the back wall we'll get to in a bit. There's a trolley line going through. That leads to a trolley end loop on this end, so it terminates right here. So there's the loop. And he had some industries here, industry warehouses, and he had apartment buildings. I hardly ever see people model apartment buildings. And he modeled it right there, squeezed it all in. And back here is the back wall I was referring to. There's actually 2 yards, 2 different railroads, a repair facility, and then there's another newer complex that I don't think was there at the 05 convention. It came later. And we'll get a picture of that, I think, right here, in Xenia. So he modeled Xenia, and this is the last part of the layout he added on. We were told that. And you can tell by the modeling quality. The modeling quality is exquisite. I mean, those are cutouts, flats, and printed. Some of them are printed. You can buy commercial backdrops with buildings on them. But what we didn't know when we looked at this picture, and I took the picture, is there in this track right here between these 2 buildings, it actually continues through the wall about 12 more feet into the next room. But it's hidden in a trough in the other room, and we didn't know it. And you'll see why in a second, and we had to discover that later. But notice the street trackage down here, and it goes under the building here, so you get a closer shot of that. You can see it goes under the building, and that's always cool when you model that. So this was his newest section that we were told. There's a little yard to the left, to the right of this picture on the end of that. That was the Pennsy Xenia yard. All right, so now, if we go to the other side, the beginning part of the Union Station complex, it begins here, more or less. That bridge that Rick was talking about is to the left of this track right here. We'll see that in a second. But there was another trolley loop in the middle of the trolley line in the downtown Dayton area, if you will. That wasn't totally finished either. Here's that bridge he was talking about. The real prototype is 3 spans. He selectively compressed to 1 span. And he scratch built the whole girders and everything. It's really nice. The trolley line kind of sneaks around and goes underneath the backdrop and comes out the other side of that styrofoam backdrop. And it has another trolley loop here with a car barn where they store the trolleys. But what I really love about this picture is this gas station complex. Really nice gas station complex. It's photographed very well. So this is part of that loop again. You can see the car barn right there. And that's where it came through the hole in the backdrop from the other side. But then it continues. It doesn't stop here. It continues. This is also, see these little detectors? These are optical detectors for the crossing guards. So it kind of shows up in this picture, but normally you don't see it very well in the room. This is part of the freight house for the trolleys so they interchange freight with the freight railroad. And then at the end, about 10 feet further down, the trolley line ends another very tight loop. This is like, I don't know whether it's 7-inch radius, something like that, 7 or 8 inch radius. Very, very tight roof. And what is going around is a pole in the basement. See that? So that's not going anywhere. They had trouble taking that out, I'm sure. Here's that bridge that you saw, the photo, the black and white photo of him earlier that Rick showed you on his prior layout. That's the same bridge. You just reinstalled it here, and then you put a girder bridge in front for the trolley line. So there's some more manufacturing further to the left of that. A lot of industries, a lot of spurs to switch on this layout. A lot. Here's some more. This is a little further to the left. And now we're getting towards the end wall. And we get into the engine facility complex. This is the New York Central, obviously, that it says that. So that was a good clue for us to see that, New York Central. What you don't see, the roundhouse is up here, and that's also New York Central. We thought originally that might have been B&O, because we got fooled by the locomotive that was sitting on a turntable was a B&O locomotive. So we got fooled, but we say it's a visiting rights. They're going to get some service and as a visitor. It must have been. So just to the left of all this is the New York Central yard. And then what's interesting is behind that yard, towards the wall, is a small Erie yard. Erie Railroad yard. But then if you go around the corner to the left some more, you're now on the next peninsula, and you've got a very long B&O Needmore yard, which is a real yard in Dayton. And there's one of his coaling towers. And then there was a little spur off the back of that that had a shop complex, like a car repair shop, engine shop, and he had a little dinky engine there, 040, I believe. There it is, on this little bridge. Some of this wasn't coupled correctly, so we got a bad thing in the picture, a little wire showing, but what the heck. It looks awesome. So here's that trestle, and here's that car repair shop that was further down. But now we're going around the blob. And we got the first trestle, and then we got the second trestle. Again, Dean didn't really have these, but he reused them for the railroad. And then we have a really nice model town here. It's tough to get a picture of. It's on the end of the blob. Here's kind of a more vertical. There's one that's even more vertical after this thing, right? But he packed in houses and industries and all sorts of things in this corner. A lot of switching. That whole wall had nothing but switching inside the main line, which you'll see a bunch of pictures of. Here's a total top-down. I normally don't take top-down pictures, but it was the only way to really capture all the structures. It's a good thing I did, because it shows you the track plan as well, a lot better. So here's one of the industry. That's a station, water tower, and then they got a gravel plant here. And there's a pit, a gravel pit. Actually, it's a quarry. And then we got Burger Brewery. He must have liked beer. He's got a German brewery there. But he also, this structure really caught my eye. You'll see it in the next slide. This one is a metal shop, Dayton fabricated steel. He had an opening in the structure where the car gondolas could go in, etc. Pretty nice little structure. It's something anybody could model here. You just cobble together some pieces. Again, it's a flat on the backdrop. Then he had another sand and gravel company on the same peninsula, the same side of the layout. So he packed a lot in, and this is only like 2 feet deep, these seams almost. Quick Grow Fertilizer, he liked that one. It must have been a real name of a real industry. I think Rick said he researched industries. Then we got the end of that Erie yard. The Erie yard I was mentioning is just to the right back here, and the New York Central yard is kind of in the front of that. And then another industry, that's a cement dealer. They use a lot of weather-covered gondolas for that one. And then there's a real interesting thing. I don't know if you noticed in the original picture I showed you, the first picture of the whole view of the layout from the one dispatcher's office, where you can see this hollow wall. This wall is not sheathed all the way in the middle area. And so we're inside the staging room, but out there is the layout. The scenes we just saw with all those gravel mills and all that are right there. And you can see through. And normally when he operated, he had 1 or 2 operators in this staging area, the main staging area. And one of these was westbound, one of them was eastbound. But he also had a modeled complete engine facility and car repair facility, and he actually had 2 coaling towers here. There's one there, and that was in that picture you saw earlier, and there's another one. He has a roundhouse, he just left the roof off, and the car repair shed's here. Got a lot packed in here. And this is the ladder for the either east or westbound staging. There's one of the coaling towers. So he didn't have to scenic that staging area, but he did. There's that nice concrete coaling tower. I like that one. So we had all the pictures then, and we didn't have the track plan done yet. This was all earlier. So not only did it have to finish tuning up all the pictures and cropping them and everything else, but then if you're going to write an article, there's a lot more to an article than just photos. Okay, so all these things you need to write an article. I don't know how many people here have written an article in the magazines. A few over here, that's good. Well, you know there's a lot that goes into it, especially a layout article. So you got to have of course, your text for the whole article, but you also got to have sidebars that Rick mentioned. You got to have a bio for the modeler and the authors as well. And we got the photos, but they got to be a combination of overalls and track sides and sidebar ones, etc. And then we got to write the captions for all that as well. That's different from the body. And then you really got to have this track plan. You got to have it nailed down pretty good. And there's some statistics about the track plan. There's a lot involved in writing an article if you're going to do it all yourself. That's why Lou Sassy does it for you when he photographs. He does nearly all that for you. Here's a brochure that we discovered in the files. Rick discovered this brochure that talked about the operating scheme and about the railroad and how it worked. And this was the current railroad. So we got some of our understandings from this and how it was operated. That came in very, very handy later. So, and then we got some statistics. So we saw some statistics about the layout. We figured out all these different things. I had to figure out a minimum radius. How do you figure out a minimum radius when you don't have any scaled photos? Pretty tough. And how do you figure out the track plan with no scaled photos? Well, I ended up counting ceiling tile and floor tile and doing a few other things, estimates. And I went through about 6 iterations before I think I got the main dimensions right. A lot of stuff going on that. So here's our track plan challenge. It was dismantled a few days after the photos were taken. We couldn't find a track plan even though we worked hard looking through all his files. And neither one of us had had very much exposure to the layout to begin with. It was on our 2009 bus trip, by the way, if you remember that one. But I didn't remember it. I don't think it was further developed as it is now. I mean, that was 2009. So this was over, 20 years later? Not 20, a decade. No, 12, whatever. So anyway, I got everything done on the structures. I did the main diagram first, but I think Rick, you wanted to mention something here. This is what we started with from one of the operators.
Now, is this on? No. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whoa.
Once we knew we wanted to do this, I went around with my iPhone and took pictures about every foot. I have 239 pictures going along all the track and all the switches and all the buildings. Then Phil Levy went around and he made the first attempt at a track plan because we couldn't find it. This was number 1. We include that there, but this is the original where Phil actually went, and we were talking about on the way in. There are a couple switches missing and a couple other things, but this gave us the overall idea of where the trains were going, where the switches were, where everything was in relation to Dayton Union Station and on all the peninsulas.
Yeah, this, you see the NYC yard is shown up here, but then it's got the Erie yard over here. Well, that's where the servicing facilities are. The Erie yard is really back here, and then the NYC yard is really in the front. Besides that, the trolley line goes in here and turns around one circle there and another circle over here. So that part was missing. But he did this from memory as best he could. At the same time, we were shooting pictures he was drawing this in the other room.
All of us getting into each other's way because of John's equipment with the lights and tripods and everything. And Phil was trying to make his drawing. He'd have to move every 3 or 4 feet.
You see this Xenia thing, the new section I told you about? You've got an arrow going that way, and what's the arrow? Well, that was that hidden staging we didn't know about. So we ended up looking for that in photos. You'll see that later here. Okay, so that's how we started. So then what I did, took that, tried to put dimensions on the main bench work. You know, tried to figure out the dimensions because I didn't even know the room dimensions. Okay? Somebody had told us some dimensions of the room, but I didn't know if that was the dimensions of the layout or the dimension of the room to here or the dimension of the room to here. So we didn't know. So I ended up piecing things together from starting from the minimum radius that I knew was about 29 inches. So we went from there and figured out some leeway for the bench work, and then we knew these were pinch points, and yes they are, 2.5, 2.5, 2 1/3. But we figured it all out from the dispatcher room dimensions that we approximated, from the restroom dimensions we approximated, from this alcove dimensions, and then we had to do the wood shop, the shop office, and the crew lounge. We didn't even know the door width, opening width here. So a lot going on, but I pieced it all together a few times. I ended up with this sketch as being pretty reasonably accurate. Once I had that, I drew it to scale and started working on the track plan. So this was the first attempt at the track plan. Well, this is how it evolved. And you can see that staging track in the other room along the wall. And that's what we were missing. And we didn't find that till really close to the end. We also discovered that there's 2 elevations of the layout that gets confusing. There's a retaining wall to separate a lot of it. So I colored that in yellow. There's another one over here, actually. Over in there. It ends up right there, I believe. So we did that. We got the primary staging all right. We got that now secondary staging. We got almost everything dimensioned. So then I zoomed in and started filling in the details. Here's that retaining wall thing again. And it went down here too with the trolley line. And then, there's another segment right there between the trolley and the freight railroad, right there, main line. So you see that need more yard there. We'll get into these yards later. This one I cut off that staging track just to zoom in better. So then, but you're not done. If you just draw the track plan, you're not done. You have to, the magazine editors want to know the elevations. So we had to figure out the elevation. We'll try to figure that out from photos. So we knew there was a retaining wall, so we knew that was probably about 4.5 inches high. And everything got figured from there, and I had to go through several iterations here until I got it right. And you had to watch the grades. You knew they weren't crazy. Uh-oh, ET call home. So then, when you take photos, you got to mark where the photo locations are in the diagram. A model railroader wants this normally. Not all magazines want that. But you got to, so now I went through with my photos and tried to figure out where they were shot from, after the fact, and mark those. And then they want all the structures labeled as much as possible. So you got to draw them in, first figure out where they all are, which on a big layout like this, it was a nightmare, especially in this area, to figure out what was going on. Figured out the rough approximate sizes of them, put them in there, and then started labeling the ones we knew the labels on. We put them all in there. So I thought it was all done. And then I got, you guys know Cynthia Priest is the editor of the NMRA Magazine. Well, Joel Priest, her son, Stephen and her son, is a master model railroader. And he draws a lot of the track plans. He was drawing this one for the magazine, from my sketch. Well, he comes back and he wants to know where the roads are. So, let me see if I got it. So, I went by and put all the roads in pink highlighter. I got to use another color somehow. So I used pink, and I did that, and I had to, of course, scan it and then email it to him, and all this. Roads in pink. There you go. So there you go. So that's the nutshell. This is the staging yard area with all the buildings in that too, I told you that. So this was all that had to be done to send to them, and they redraw it like this. After all of that. Because he wanted to know where the forest, where the tree lines were and all that. So he figured that out, and I told him on the photos. I checked this. Fortunately, they let me review draft copies of this before they published it. That's very helpful. Normally, the magazines do not do that, but NMRA Magazine does. So it's another advantage to go with the NMRA. So it's very accurate. You can see now we got the NYC yard, we've got the Erie yard, we've got the B&O Newport yard, and we've got the Pennsy Xenia yard, a little one on stage and then a hidden staging yard. And of course we got Dayton Union Station, the centerpiece of the whole lab. So there it is. Now, once we had the track plan, then most articles, they want to know something about operations. How did you operate the layout? Well, neither one of us has ever operated the layout, and there are only like half the operators still alive that did operate it, only a few of them. So we interviewed a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them, and we pieced together the story from that and that brochure I showed you earlier. And so we found out that dispatching, he didn't use a clock. He didn't use a timetable either. He just did things in sequence. Trains ran in sequence. And all passenger and freight, and they all went through the Dayton Union Station. So the routings, the dispatcher in the dispatcher room controlled the mainline turnouts and the mainline blocks. There were 9 mainline blocks. Remember, it's cab control. And they controlled the mainline turnouts and the signals. So the signals were controlled manually by the dispatcher. Yard operators ran independently. And road crews controlled the industry turnouts when they switched industry. That's how it works. So the crew size is pretty substantial, 10 to 14 people. And we went further. I've never seen this done in any publication. We didn't publish this. They didn't use that. I like to use this slide. But we actually show on the track diagram where the operators stood in general. So we had 1 or 2 staging, primary staging operators in there. Okay. We had another yard operator here, and there was an optional, where was the other yard? Oh, right here, there's 2 yards. 2 yards, the Erie, New York Central, the B&O, and the Pennsy. All right. We had an optional Union Station complex operator. They weren't always there. That was optional. We had an optional interurban conductor that connected the interurban from here, around here, all the way down to there. So that was optional. And then we had a tower operator. It was very important because the tower operator controlled the junction between the interurban and the mainline railroad. So that was a staff position. They controlled the traffic flow and the crossings. And then the mainline operators, remember those push buttons? There were 4 of them. Well, the last one was color-coded. The last one was black. Black meant local control only. That was a local operator. So the first 3 were the mainline operators. And so we have orange, blue, green. They're the mainline operators. So you only had 3 mainline trains running around this layout at once. And he still packed in all these operations. 1 or 2 dispatchers were in the dispatcher room over here. So that's it. So you can see schematically where the operators were. Mainline trains, like I said, they all passed through the station. These 3 railroads originated from multiple different places. The Erie ones originated from 1 track in one of those staging yards in the primary room. And the other trains came from Xenia, that Xenia staging, and then some more from Cincinnati via the westbound staging. And then trolleys, interurbans, I showed you those. It's pretty interesting. So here you have the staging yards. Again, you have the 3, you have the eastbound, the westbound. That 1 track on the bottom here was the Erie staging track. Went right into the yard right there. Then this staging down here off the page came in at Xenia. So there you get the idea of and the 4 modeled yards are the ones I've talked about several times now. Plus Dayton Union Station, you consider that almost like a yard. Main staging yards, again, that's what they look like from the other view. And there are different elevations, by the way. This one goes underneath that one. It's lower than this one. And it goes underneath. And we see that track plan. Let's see it on the track plan. That's the only place right here, this dotted line right here, from this yard here underneath. That's the only place there's hidden traffic. in the whole lab. And it's a short distance, it's just passing through from station. This is the wood shop, the far shop building, and that's where that hidden yard was, staging yard, with 2 tracks inside a box with a cover on it. So you couldn't see it normally, we weren't looking for it, we didn't know it was there. Fortunately, I got a photo of it. So after looking at the photo, we realized it was there. This is his operating sequence, all his trains. Notice the throttles, he's got color coded on which throttle is which train, by color. So there's your sequence of trains, freight and passenger. Now his dispatching room was, this was also a huge mystery. His track diagram here, he's got 2 of them. This is the Dayton Union Station complex. I'm sorry, this is the, this is the Dayton Union Station complex. That is a blow up of this and this put together. And you might say, well, his layout's not figure 8, what's going on here? What he did is a double track layout, but he operated it like a figure 8 sort of. And he folded, in the real world, this loop here is folded up into this loop, on the layout. But operationally, it's unfolded. So how's that for confusion? And that was hard to figure out. We didn't figure out why these 2 look like these, but they weren't the same. And that's why. You fold them together, you get it.
He based that also on the actual prototype in Dayton Union Station. This is his version after he went in, photographed it, and decided that he wanted to have that style in his dispatcher's room. He constricted it down to look like this.
Right, you gotta remember, the whole focus of the lab was the Dayton Union Station complex. And he's just generating traffic through there with everything else in the railroad, plus providing industries and all that. So that's kind of the gist of his lab. Very, very clever. He had phones and all that stuff. We could call people, the other operators. And he had a schematic like this for every train. It's just a blank schematic. But then when you fill it in for a certain train, like here's one of the trains, out of eastbound staging, going through that tunnel I told you about, coming out, going around to the new station, and then it probably continued on to somewhere else too. But this was the first half of his journey. So he had a diagram for each train like that. So it was very well documented, laid out for guest operators. You could figure out where to go, etc. Very interesting. I hear the controls blown up again. There's that black button for local, and then these are the other 3 mainline cabs. He had all his surplus electronic gear on that wall between the staging yard and the layout up high. All this stuff, so I wouldn't want to touch that with your bare finger, but there you go. That's all the classic cab controls, lots of transformers. He had a couple auxiliary rooms. We mentioned the one already, but we got the shop complex, which also doubled as an office. I had that woodworking room. I showed you a part of that. I didn't show you the paint shop. And then he had a crew lounge on the other side of the central office, which you'll see a picture of Rick in here on that. Here's his main shop. It's the one in the middle. He had different stations for different activities. So he had like electronics area right here. He had a mechanical thing where he worked mainly on his models and mechanical stuff, working on mechanisms, etc. And he had all sorts of tools. It was amazing. He had a computer set up. He had a VHS player there to play videotapes.
That's a devoted man.
Well, the whole basement was used for the railroad.
And the whole thing was that neat all the time.
It was very neat. Here's a blow up of the carpentry. See, all his carpentry tools are all on pegboards on the one wall. And he's got a bandsaw and there's that hidden track again that we didn't find. The other side of this room is this, with his own spray booth, venting it outside, etc. I mean, and there's the other main shop in there. That's his office chair, actually. So then beyond the main shop, right here, it's an open wall, is this crew lounge and library. And so there's Rick frantically looking for that track plan we never found. So that was great. And behind him is my laptop computer when I was taking the pictures. So I load them in there. And then see all his research library up here, etc. And then the stairs that go up, it goes right to the back of his garage.
Almost where I'm sitting there is where we had a table similar to this, where when he was superintendent, we would conduct our Board of Governors meetings from.
Right in the
in
basement.
that room.
We used to do our BOD in people's basements too, a long time ago. All right, so now this is the final thing on the article, and this is one of the most interesting things. So you got all this stuff done. Which magazine do you approach to have it published? What would you think considerations are? Because there's Railroad Model Craftsman, there's Model Railroader, and there's NMRA Magazine, and then there's others. There's an online MRAH magazine, Model Railroad Hobbyist, and there's a few others. So how do you decide? What would you guys do? What would you decide? Is there some criteria you'd use? Well, it turns out I have enough knowledge of how most of the magazines work. I recommended to Rick that we go with the NMRA magazine. And there were two reasons, because we had connections with MR, with all these articles on the computers and model railroading and all that. He was the columnist for. So he had a connection to MR, so we could have gone to MR. But MR takes a long time to publish something usually. And sometimes they edit it a lot as well. So we didn't know what we'd get or when it would go. Remember, this was already a year and a half after he passed away. We're getting to this point. And a lot of his friends are getting older too, so we wanted to make sure this happened in a timely manner. So I said, well, what about the NMRA magazine? He's a master model railroader. He's pretty famous in the NMRA leadership community and everything else. So why don't we try that? And I knew Cynthia Priest. A lot of you guys know that, her too. And so we tried that approach. Railroad Model Craftsman would have had the same issue potentially. We'd have to find the editor, and then I didn't really know the current editor that well, and it would still take a while to get published probably. Model Railroad Hobbyist would be all electronic. We really wanted a printed format for keepsake for the family. So there's a lot of other options, but that's where it boiled down. And it turned out to be a great move. Cynthia published it. She said, when I first contacted her by email, she responded right away. And she said, well, you know, we have to wait in the queue. There's other things going on first, you know, and there's publication, it's 2 months out, 3 months out usually is the deadline. And so I said, I'll have to wait a while. And I said, well, how long was a while? And she said, oh, maybe February. And here I am talking to her in November. And so I'm saying,
we'll take it.
We'll take it. You know, I mean, that's about as quick as you can expect with publication timing. So she did it like right away. She had her son do the track plan like right away. Actually, she started on the track plan with Joel, I think, before we even finalized everything. So it was pretty cool. So you can look at number of circulation. Obviously, I think MR is still the largest circulation, but RMC is looking really good. Of course, MR now is going to get good because they're going to make more pages and thicker paper and all that now. So that's going to be good. So you can look at that. Print quality is a factor too. MR had gone down. Now it's going to get better again. The queue, the amount of editing, proofs, etc. They let me have proofs. I've never seen that before, and that was great because we got a few things. And the pay scale, well, they're similar. Every one of these magazines gives you some money, but it never pays for your work, obviously. I mean, there's so many hundreds of hours of work in this. It's never going to pay for it. All right.
Okay, so when we had to figure out how they operated on the layout, tell us some more details. Obviously, we had not operated on it. So we went to Phil Glebe, who is a member of Division 3, John Smith had operated, Mike Marinas, Jim Montgomery, Ken Allen, and Jim Reinhardt were our primary source of information. And I would meet with them, I'd talk to them for hours on time on the telephone just to figure out how they did things. So I think we got it pretty well accurate as to how the operations went, how the trains went through the station and that type of thing. Bob was a member of what they called the Wednesday operating group. And I think it's one of the premier operating groups in southwestern Ohio, and includes Ed Swain, Kurt LaRue, Bob Bartesic, Bob Fink, and all these guys here. So they were familiar with that operation. So we gave it a sanity check once we got the final draft. So we'd like to thank these guys for their attention to our detail, and we really appreciate that. Jim Reinhardt is an interesting person. Jim was our third superintendent for Division 3, and he's a traction guy. So on the days that he showed up, they ran the traction through the trolleys, through the town and everything, and he was the primary operator. He's now 95 years old. He's still able to carry on a conversation, but he's out of the hobby for a long time now. John just passed away last month. So we've lost a couple of our railroads. I don't know what's going to happen to John's railroad. They haven't even scheduled his memorial service yet. But at age 88, he just passed away from heart issues. The rest of them are still alive and able to give us information. Okay, so this is a guy that we really honor his legacy. And the way that we can carry his story on is through stories like this, through reading the article and that type of thing. And we just appreciate the way he's been a lifetime model railroader, a great family man. I should mention he did a hitch in the early 60s in the Army and was stationed in Europe. Came back and became the editor of our newsletter in the middle 60s. And I have a copy of the call board where he has an editorial in there that he says, I espouse scratch building and kit bashing and that type of thing. Let's try to stay away from the pre-made things that you can buy from the stores. The real art of this hobby is in your modeling. So there he is, the consummate modeler. I appreciate, I'm our AP monitor in Division 3 right now. I appreciate how he approached and got the certificates. So in my mind, he actually walked the talk in every sense of our hobby. And that's why I think he's just tremendous. So we're going to conclude.
Oh, wait, Les is word first.
Oh yeah, let's go to that. John and I thought, well, maybe what we ought to do is include, as part of the conclusion, what did we learn about this? Well, one of the first things is that nice layouts really deserve to be promulgated in forums like this. A lot of the things that he tried, I think you could put into your layouts too. And as John mentioned, you don't need to have a fortune to do a layout. And it's nice to be part of an operating group to have that. But the one thing that we found very frustrating was that layout was permanent. It was built to stay there. And he did not have a track plan that we could find. He was flawless in everything else. Luckily, we only had 2 days to be able to photograph and do this type of work. The house was already sold and they needed to get the layout out of there. So a crew came in with a saw and actually cut it into 17 different modules. And a bunch of guys bigger than me came and hauled all 17 up and put them in a truck and took them off. Luckily, that layout, Bob's layout, will be incorporated into another person's layout who actually doesn't live far from Waynesville. And hopefully when he does that, we'll be able to go and see all these aspects. All those wonderful structures went with it. I think he was going to ditch the World War II surplus electrical stuff and put a more modern DCC system in. But other than that, it was going to stay. His plan was to have it stay the same. So what's the end game for your layout? We have a couple people in our division that said when they pass away, just take it and throw it in a dumpster. I'm hoping that they're saying that tongue in cheek and that they've got a better plan than that. Okay? And what I'd like to do is say something about that companion article that Cindy wrote. We got to be fairly close with her and really kind of a neat lady. And she did a one-page article, not at our insistence, but at our strong recommendation, where she actually goes back as the kid of a prolific model railroader of 62 years in the NMRA, and describes what it's like to be a girl in that. And she,
It's extremely well written.
yeah.
You need to read it. If you don't read the rest of the article, at least read that one page.
I'm going to read the last paragraph as our conclusion here, where she describes him as a historian, an artist, tinkerer, those types of things. But then she comes up with, in the months after Dad's passing, his fellow model railroaders from the Dayton and Cincinnati markets were a constant source of help, guidance, and memories to share. They were as concerned as I was about the future of Dad's layout and committed to ensuring others enjoy and experience what brought him so much joy. Dedication and friendship clearly defined the relationship my dad built through a common passion for trains. Perhaps that's the greatest gift of all from model railroading. I thought she couldn't have said that any better, and it gives me goosebumps every time I read that. So it's been a pleasure to pass this along to all of you. We encourage you to come up. I've got a couple pictures that I've taken of Bob. We did some tributes to him in our call board. There are a couple biography pages here from Model Railroad, and you know, we just hope you enjoy it.
Any other questions? Any other questions about it? The layout? The man? So, everybody wants to see these two great layouts today, so we'll let you do that. Do you have anything else? That's it, all right. So, we have to put our chairs
We hope you enjoyed this video from the NMRA Division 7 in Cincinnati. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. For more information about the division, please visit our website and Facebook page.